Quote, the Civil War, which broke out in the summer of 1918, first went favorably for the whites. In late June and early July, the troops of the Sumara government captured Simbirsk, Kazan, and Ufa. Kolchak's units, advancing from Siberia, took Perm in the Urals and almost reached the Volga. Denikin proceeded to occupy virtually all of the Ukraine and advance on to Moscow. In the middle of October, his troops took Orel and approached Tula, the last important center south of Moscow. At the same time, Ayudenich advanced from Estonia on Petrograd. And he ended up only 30 miles from that city, basically in the outskirts. A recent historian has summed it up this way. Quote, in the middle of October, it appeared that Petrograd and Moscow might fall simultaneously to the whites. Okay. Then what happens? Quote, the tide turned. Ayudenich's offensive collapsed just short of the former capital. Although the Red Army had had to be created from scratch, it had constantly improved in organization, discipline, and leadership under Commissar of War Trotsky. So he was a good soldier, he was a good fighter. And the Red Army managed finally to turn the tables on both Kolchak and Denikin. The admiral, who had assumed the title of Supreme Ruler of Russia, had received recognition from some other white leaders, and he suffered crushing defeat in late 1919 and was executed by the Bolsheviks on February 7th, 1920. Now, if the provisional government had executed everyone who committed treason against it, then they would have executed these Bolshevik leaders clear back in 1917. The Bolsheviks weren't so lenient and nice. They did execute people who tried to destroy their government. But the provisional government wouldn't, which means they allowed the Bolsheviks to live. So put that in your pocket for later if you're ever in a revolution. Now the Polish War intervenes, the Reds fight the Poles, then when they get done with that, they aim their sights back at this group down around the Black Sea that's fighting them. Quote, after more bitter fighting, Wrangel, his remaining army, and a considerable number of civilians, altogether about 100,000, were evacuated on Allied ships to Constantinople in mid-November. Other and weaker counter-revolutionary strongholds, such as that in Archangel, had already fallen. By the end of 1920, the white movement had been effectively defeated. There you go, by the end of 1920. Now, shots continued to be fired clear up until 1923, but that was just small guerrilla warfare, armed bands, small military clashes. The large-scale fighting was over by 1920. And as Ayn Rand said, you can never win if you're not fighting for something. And the whites didn't have anything that they were fighting for. They couldn't even rally the citizenry to be on their side because they weren't offering anything except it was better before, wasn't it? Wasn't it nice earlier on? Now, that's, I think, the end of what I need to do on this Russian Civil War. More could be done. You could look at every single one of the battles. You could analyze where this general should have moved or whatever. I don't know if really that detail of information exists on it. I don't have it in my books. It probably exists somewhere. But the larger picture of the Civil War, that it was sort of like the melting away of an autocratic government where democracy seemed to be taking over, was interrupted by brute force, by people who had an ideology and guns, and they weren't afraid to use either one. Much blood and much determination down the road, they took power of the whole damn country. So it's the fact that there was no one there to fight them. The only thing to believe in was peace, bread, and freedom, and anyone preaching the opposite of peace, bread, and freedom couldn't be any good. But, as we saw, the communists were completely disingenuous, offering everything from election in the military, which they didn't end up giving in their military, to land to the peasants, which they then confiscated and instituted conscription of working, actually drafting people just to work, forced labor. So, let's see, I think that's all we can do or say about the Russian Revolution, was that Lenin was a thug from the beginning, Trotsky was a thug alongside of him. They used physical force, murder, and mayhem, and there was no one arrayed against them with any formidable ideas or ideology or even force, physical force. And that's why Russia fell under the boot of communism, because they just didn't have a bunch of Benjamin Franklins and George Washingtons to lead the desperate battle against the foe, whoever the foe was. And in this case, it was thugs with guns who the country had been getting along with and acceding to and consulting with. Remember that way back early, the government had to consult with the Soviet workers Petrograd. So there we go. So thanks very much to the gentleman who donated the money for this series. Those of you who enjoyed the series and you enjoy the work I do, please donate and get me to read more books and spend more time outlining material for things that you are interested in and things that I'm interested in. You can just donate money and I'll do whatever I see fit for the videos, or you can request something to be done.